Frogs. Spunky little amphibians known for their use in biology classrooms and generally being neat little dudes. Mugs. A sort of container used for holding various liquids to be consumed by people. Put them together and you get the frog mug. First produced in Sunderland and dating back to around 1775, these cool little cups captured my interest. Such a concept. What an interesting idea. And so I set out on a quest to make one for myself.
These are the first frogs I sculpted. Do not get attached to them, they will not be sticking around. You'll notice that the clay is far too wet and sticking to my fingers, but having not worked with the clay at this point, I didn't realize this wasn't normal and just kept going at it. I'm not using reference, and you can clearly tell, based on how not froggish these are turning out, less normal amphibian, more creature from the bog. It really starts going that direction here, where I start adding external eyelids to already pointy eyes. Not a typical trait to frog anatomy that modern science or I am aware of, which really just adds to its freak nature. Its only redeeming quality at this point is its legs, which also adds some froggishness back to its lean monstrosities. I made more of these mistakes of nature, but we'll just skip past those for now. Showing them off, you can see they all follow the kind of same blueprint, which includes all the same issues. Not very smooth, mountainous eyes with external eyelids, and short, stubby legs. The best of the bunch is also the first, so I was really just going downhill as I went. 0 out of 10 frogs, see me after class type frogs. So we'll try sculpting again. This time, I am using a reference image. You'll also notice that I seem to be following a bigger is better mantra and starting with a larger shape. And I also figured out that eyes go inside of the skin. But you'll also notice that I'm starting to go for more of a standing position this time around, rather than the laying down of the previous iteration. This quickly falls apart with the back legs, making it look like someone missed every lower body exercise in the book. I'll eventually get to quote-unquote fixing it, but this is not a great start. This frog is also distinct from its predecessor in that it gets ridges along its back, and is slightly more rotund, not as lean. It's getting closer to packing a frog, but it isn't quite there yet. Let's fast forward through its sibling creation and compare. Again, too wet of clay makes the surface far too bumpy. The eyes are better, and we're edging closer to a frog shape, but this isn't a realistic depiction. It's more musical instrument rather than living creature. Comparing between the two versions, while I do like parts of version 2, like the rotundness and the eyes, I like the position on version 1 more. Overall, 3 out of 10. So now we're on frogs version 3. They're rounder like version 2, but laying down like version 1. Their unique trait is their close-set, bulging eyes. It's closer to true frog form, but not quite there yet. 4 out of 10 frog. At this point, I'm tired of making frogs. I don't want to get stuck in this loop of frogs. I have to do something different. So I start a vivisection of the version 3 frogs to get the excess clay out. If you don't do this on thicker pieces, you have to wait for them to fully dry, and even then they may contain moisture even if they feel dry, which can cause explosions in the kiln. Not good. These aren't gonna go into the kiln, but for future practice. I then decided that surgery wasn't enough work for the day and tried to start making the actual mugs. I didn't stop beforehand though, and everything was sticking to everything else. Not a great time. Had to give up and actually put down my working surface. Each frog is then slipped and scored onto a platform that'll eventually become the bottom of the mug, and then a long rectangle is made for the body. You'll notice I'm doing no shaping or anything else that would make this look even decent. You'll see little cracks and holes in my mug surface. This is a pure first grader type mug. I even try to roll out little snakes to fill in the cracks at the bottom where the raw edges of the mugs meet, but you'll see that this goes poorly. I come back after the mugs have dried for a day to attempt to add some shaping through carving and make the handles. After making them, I attach them decent enough and add a little frog mark to the bottom for character. In motion, the mugs look fine, but in stills you can really see where the popham starts to shine through. First of all, the cups are way too thin, they'd be too brittle for any kind of daily use, and would lose heat quickly, which is important in a mug that may be holding hot liquid. They're also quite warped. Since I didn't have any clay knowledge before I went into this, I didn't know how to handle the clay correctly to make it not warped. And overall, they're pretty poorly made. There's dents, there's cracks, and there's bumpiness all around it. Even if the previous 2 issues were fixed and they were perfect as they were, these would still be pretty poor looking cups. So what's one of the biggest problems with all my previous frogs, not including me? The clay. While I could attempt to dry my current clay to the perfect consistency, I have already developed a deep loathing for this particular bag, so I decided to buy new. And what a joy this clay was to work with. It comes together nearly effortlessly. All my hours of frog making paired with this wonderful mud come together to form this exquisite creature. I call her Marjorie. She's my pride and joy. The most beautiful frog I have ever seen, 9 out of 10. Just a little more smoothing and she would rival Aphrodite herself. I quickly go into dissection mode to ensure she stays beautiful forever before going on to create her siblings. I then go back to the same method I used last time to form mugs. This time though, I am smoothing down with a rib and setting these aside for a while to let them firm up, in an effort to make them less likely to bend over and be difficult to work with. Once I think they're set enough, I go back to scoring the bottom and adding the frogs. The difference this time, aside from having more frogs, is that some of them are on the wall instead of the bottom. Instead of scoring the bottom, I score the mug walls before curving them and attach them to the bottom. I also attach handles at this point, and if they look too thin, that's because they are. Anyways, after some attempted cleanup, off they go to sit for a week to dry before I apply underglaze both to the outside and the frogs. Okay, this would be the part where I show you how I painted the underglaze on the mugs and frogs, but I'm kinda stupid and can't find the file, so just imagine what it's like to paint a soup can and you get the basic idea. I painted the outsides green, and the insides were either white or left natural, and the frogs got painted based on one of 4 different color variants I found online. Then they were left to dry again until it was time to be bisque fired. After bisque firing, I took them back home, poured it in a clear glaze, waited for that to dry, and then took them back for their final glaze firing. And they suck. Don't get me wrong, the frogs inside look mostly good. Marjorie herself turned out perfect, and while the other one's colors are a little different than the colors I expected from the bottles, they are still pretty good. The cups themselves, however, are a different story. The handles are way too thin. The cup itself is warped, and quite honestly, I don't like the underglaze coloring. Overall, it's just not a very good cup. So where do we go from here? You already know the answer. It's time to make more frogs! Forgive me for the quality, it's just gonna get worse. I'm only gonna show you a little bit of this frog making because I want to show you this gem. Skipping ahead a bit, now I'm going and making the mug wall. I'm doing this kind of factory style where I'm making them all in one go. You'll see that I'm using clothes hangers this time around just because they're a little thicker. Then I went ahead and emptied out my frogs to make sure that they did not explode in the kiln. Not much to say, it's just I don't want the frogs to explode. Once I was finished with emptying out the frogs, most of the mugs were ready to be formed, so I attached the sides to one another and started shaping the bottom to be more of a curved shape. This is to help give it a better shape than the last time around. After this secondary shaping, we're going to go ahead and put this on the counter for a little bit longer just to harden up just a bit more, so when we put in the frogs, it'll be a little easier. After that, it was time to paint the frogs. This time, I'm painting them with underglaze outside the mugs rather than inside like I did last time, hoping for a cleaner look overall and also having more control over the spots. We're gonna go ahead and skip the rest of the frog painting. It's just painting. After this, it's time to attach the frogs to the bottom, so I use the mug's circle base to figure out how big of a base I need. I then attach a little coil of clay around the base of the frog just to make sure that there's no cracks underneath that any kind of bacteria would be able to live under. Then once I'm sure that the frog is attached to the base, I flip my mug's base over and then attach the square to the bottom, making sure that I'm smoothing it out so it looks smooth. You'll also notice I cut away a bit of it at some points, especially for the bigger frog. That's just to make sure it fits, nothing more there. Once those are smoothed on, I go in and I finish up the rim just a bit more, make sure that everything is nice and smooth, and eventually once they're a little bit harder, I go back in with the rib and smooth out the outside, just try and make it look a little nicer, and then also go in on the inside and start smoothing out the attachments between the frog base and the mug walls. I then use a water bottle to make sure everything is nice and circular. I keep doing that for a while. I'm also going back through and I'm making sure all the cups are level with one another, using one as the base. I then make sure I'm going back through, I'm finishing with the rim, I'm still using my water bottle as a circular tool, and then I'm carving in my little Maker's Mark frog on the bottom just as a little Easter egg, I suppose. Then once that's done, I go ahead and start making the handles. We're going for a little bit of a thicker design this time, along with a decorative element for having a little edge. Just something simple, nice to hold. I made sure that I really experimented with it this time around.
And it paid off. I really like the shape on these a lot more than the last ones, and I especially like the handles. That little bit of texture really adds to it, really makes the mugs pop, I think. Anyways, nothing special happens between this form until after they're fired, so let's move on to glazing. I wet down the mugs with a wet sponge to remove any dust that might cause an issue with glazing. Then I applied tape around the frogs inside so that I wouldn't get any glaze on them when painting the inner layer. I had to brush the glaze on this time instead of just pouring it in, since it wasn't clear and would thus cover my frog colors. Once I was satisfied I had enough glaze on the inside, I removed the tape from the frogs and brushed them over with a clear glaze. I also went back in and reapplied the color glaze where the tape may have torn it. Once I believed the glaze on the inside of the mugs was sufficiently dry, I put a piece of tape on the bottom to protect the rest of the mug, and then poured the rest of my glaze on. Could I have brushed it on? Yes, but this saves energy. After all the mugs were glazed, I had them sit for about a week until I believed they were dry enough, and then sent them out for their final firing. And now for the grand reveal. They're alright. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud I got them done, and I do enjoy the shape and glazing. Well, most of it. However, my brush on glazing skills still need work, as seen by those opaque little patches on the frogs. I also did test the mugs for leaks by filling them with water and leaving them overnight, and they turned out fine, so I'm considering that a mug success. I'd say they're decent. Not craft fair material, but I'd be thrilled to find one in a garage sale. Anyway, please enjoy these overview shots. Things I would change if I could go back and redo these cups. Having general hand-building knowledge for pottery, I went into this not having any idea how to work with clay, except for the kinds of projects that you make in like middle school. So if I were going into it now, with my future wisdom-filled self, I'd probably go online, maybe YouTube, and watch a couple of pros actually work with clay, so that I'd know what I was doing and probably avoid some of the problems I had, such as the warping on some of the cups. 2. I wish I had tested more of my glazes. Those first glazed cups were not actually glazed, they were underglazed, but I still didn't apply it correctly as seen by all the brush strokes. And if I had gone ahead and tested it, I probably would have realized, hey, I'm kind of stupid for doing that, as well as being able to see what kind of color combinations I could have had. Plus, maybe my frogs wouldn't have turned out such ugly colors that time. I would have been able to see that that underglaze was not the color right for me. And 3, I wish I had been willing to not go ahead with some of the mugs. Even when I was first transporting that first batch of mugs to their bisque firing, I kind of got the feeling that I didn't like them, but I was kind of hard set in my ways and hoped that maybe they'd turn out, which obviously they did not. I would have been able to save myself both some time and money if I had just agreed with myself to put them away for a little bit and maybe redo them. Things I would improve if I were given some time in the future and I decided I wanted to redo this project, what would I change? First off, cooler glazing. There are so many different ways you can do glazing. Bubble glazing, peacock technique. That's not even counting all the things you can buy straight from jars from glaze manufacturers. There is so much you can do with glaze to make your mugs or even just any kind of pottery stand out. So in the future, I would totally go for a super cool mug with like rainbows and stuff. Speaking of colors, I want some new frogs. I want some cool frogs. I stuck with only Pac-Man frogs at this time, and they're okay. They're fine. They're different colors, but it would be interesting to see different types of frogs. Tree frogs are very prolific, I think, in pottery, but even a bullfrog would be a nice departure from just having the same frog over and over again. And on that as well, different positions for the frogs. You saw that in the first batch of mugs that I did have some of them on the wall, but I went ahead and did away with that in the second batch just because I wanted to focus on one specific avenue of going ahead so that I could get it the best it could. And that's kind of sad. I'd like to have more frog positions instead of all just on the bottom. I think it'd be nice to have them on the wall. Maybe they're splayed out. Maybe they're in different like frog positions. I don't know how many positions frogs take up in nature, but I'm sure there's at least a few that look good in a cup. And finally, I'd probably do a cooler cup shape. The slab mug itself, that first batch, were, you know, what you'd assume when you think of a slab mug made by somebody who doesn't do pottery all that often. And the second one is nice. It's more mug shaped, but looking around online, you can definitely see that a lot of slab mugs can get really cool. They can get you can get angular. There's so many different ways you can shape clay. I think if I were to redo this project, I would try to do a more innovative cup shape, I'd say. Less to standard, more artistic, I guess. Anyways, that's it. Bye-bye.